Hi, everybody, and welcome to Metaphysical Insights. My very special guest today is Barry Fitzgerald, and I've been waiting to do this for quite a while. I miss the chats. So I think most of you know who Barry is. It's kind of difficult to have, you need an hour to go through the list of accomplishments and go over his CV. So I think we'll probably just get right into it. Um, Welcome, Barry. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, William. Thanks for having me back again. It's a great honor, I must say. And by the way, Donna sends her best.
Oh, good. Give her mine as well.
I
I've
will.
missed the two of you.
Thank
So
you.
yeah. Um, I know you have a new book out.
I do. Yes, there it is. Hot off the
Ah,
press.
excellent. Now, has that changed much from the draft manuscript form from several months ago?
There have been some changes in it, yes. And you know, when we reviewed it and went back over it again, I
Hmm.
could clearly see from the days that I was writing the influence,
Hmm.
and in the midst of gods, how I was eventually going to arrive on that to make that book. I can see the connections between book after book after book, which I never would have planned that.
Right.
But clearly, it's within the deception of gods and men that it's there. The connection is quite blatant.
Yes. Fantastic. Well, first off, let me post. How do people buy it? I have
Uh,
read the I've read the manuscript, everybody.
mhm.
It's a fascinating, incredible book. You're not going to skim through it. It's a heavy read, which means you think your mind gets awakened. And to be honest, it's one of those books that I keep thinking about and I have questions about. Okay, but what did he really mean here? What does he really mean here?
Mhm.
And I want
Mhm.
to talk to you about those sometime,
Sure. Mhm.
probably maybe off air because I don't want to give away any spoilers. But
Okay.
whatever works for you, however far you want to go today is great.
Yeah,
But yeah, how
yeah.
do they order it?
If they pop over to Amazon and just do a search for the deception of gods and men, and it'll come up onto the bar there, and off they go.
Okay.
I believe it's being formatted as well for an audiobook. So I'm looking forward to hearing that one myself. It's
Right.
available in paperback, I believe hard copy, and ebook.
Okay. Well, I've like I say, I've read the manuscript, but I'm going to buy the book. Um,
Thank you.
I definitely want it, and I know a couple people I need to buy it from. I've read. Let me see. I haven't read the trilogy that you wrote, partly because I
Ah,
got the
yes.
order mixed up, and I didn't have the third book because you were out of it last time I saw you.
Ah, yes, yes, yes. Mhm.
So I didn't want to read the second book first or something. But I've read everything else I think that you've written,
Great,
and
great.
um, your books are fascinating, and I use them in research.
Yeah. Well,
Seriously.
that's what they were for.
Yeah.
And even the trilogy, the Council of Three, even that has little, what do they call them, Easter eggs hidden throughout.
Right.
And again, I can see that this path clearly laid out. Reviewing all the books now, I can see, yes, it's been leading to this, and the fruit of the gods, which is coming after this one.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll have to have you on for that one too. Now, when is that one coming out?
Who knows? It's still
Okay.
being written.
Okay.
So I'm waiting on laboratory tests actually coming back, to allow me to progress with
Okay.
with that particular one.
Great. And if, for people that haven't seen all of your work, and because you've got YouTube videos out like crazy, as well as
Mhm.
the television show you've had, and um, I think you've been on others too, haven't you? I mean, ones that you haven't. Um,
Yeah. There's been
yeah.
many ones that I was on, but
Yeah.
for the most part, a lot of people will remember the sci-fi show Ghost Hunters International.
Right. But Barry, part of what for all of you who haven't seen all the rest. part of what I like about him and really trust his work is you do the lab analysis, you do
Mhm,
the critical thinking, you call things what they are, and if it's a hoax, you call it a hoax.
mhm,
Um,
mhm, mhm.
he's had some YouTube video programs that he's worked on or put out that have debunked some pretty serious things that some peril and some extreme um, travel in some
Yeah,
other things.
yeah, that's for sure. And the last travel that we did in that particular nature
Mhm.
was the three fingered mummies in Peru. There you see their
Oh, that's
hand.
right. Yep.
And yes, we really worked very very hard on that case,
Yep.
and to see that these bodies that were being allegedly dug up from the from the desert, from cave systems in the desert, were actually being manufactured. Uh, and it was sad what was actually happening, and the fact that they were destroying their heritage to make these for short gains.
Right.
You know, it was just it was sad to see that the culture should be um, cut up like that.
Yeah, it is. And I would imagine you still have the occasional threat from uh, pulling that one out.
I don't think I'll go back to Peru anytime soon.
I wouldn't. Actually, and part of the thing about the video, what or the video was it was like a thriller in the sense I knew you got out alive because you made the video, and I'd talked to
Yes.
you since.
Uh-huh,
But
uh-huh.
you're involved in that story so much as well as the
Hmm.
story of the mummies and the whole
Uh-huh,
process
uh-huh.
that you're kind of on a seat edge of your seat type thing is like, uh-oh, what's going to happen here?
I can remember the last time that I was in Peru. I was almost evacuated to another hotel that was actually buried into this mountainside, and
Oh,
there was no one else staying in the hotel. It was
okay.
out of season and everything else, but I remember staying in this room for 2 days, hiding out, so to speak, and every now and again I would go to the surface and have something to eat while overlooking this huge valley from the restaurant windows, and then sneak back downstairs again into the bowels of the hotel. But you know, people in Peru are not tall. You
Uh-huh.
know, they have a short stature, but these hotel rooms I thought were odd that they were number one buried into the side of a mountain, but the doors were almost twice my height, and
Oh,
I thought, why? Why do you need such large doors?
it's like going into a stately home or something.
Yeah, it was another enigma that I had just stumbled into that I never got an answer for.
Well, and you'd be kind of hard to hide there too, because you are
Yeah,
taller,
yeah.
and the Peruvians don't have an Irish accent.
No, no,
I
they
don't know
don't.
how your Spanish is, but I don't know. Maybe you have a good Peruvian Spanish accent.
It's my Spanish is horrible,
Okay.
absolutely horrible. Of all languages, I find Spanish is very challenging for me because um, naturally they tend to speak faster,
Yes.
and once they speed up, that's it. I'm absolutely lost.
Yeah.
So it can be difficult enough.
My Spanish teacher kept telling me to quit speaking French. But I can't
Uh,
help it, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Oh
if
well.
now, how does the progression of your books lead up to Deception and then the next one? I know what you mean, but I'm interested to hear just
Well, certainly the the influence is where it really, really changes. And this particular book here, the influence, it changes things around because it looks at the biology of the human body and how when we're introduced to this phenomena from beyond the veil, about how our biology can change and alter, and it also explores this aspect of how the signals are being processed within the body and how the body is picking up on the signals from outside, and how this is being processed. Now, the deception of gods and men takes this a step further, because it looks at the spiritual makeup of the human body, and how and how today, in a modern sense, we use the term soul and spirit as interchangeable, but that's not the case. Our ancestors didn't see that either. The soul was separate. The spirit was separate. They were not interchangeable. They were two separate pieces of us, of that were carried inside this husk. So the influence explores that nature about initially how this aspect of the soul is pulling the information and how it triggers aspects within the body for us to consciously become aware that it's signaling us to tell us that there is a problem beyond. And that was a huge thing to see, that the influence, after all these years, still makes its appearance within the recent publications. And in the Mist of Gods was another publication that saw me, after our experiences within the Mayan underworld, the Zabalba, the world of the dead, about the experiences there, that really made me focus my attention on things that were happening underneath our feet within the cave systems around the world, cave systems and mines in particular. And then I started looking at the folklore of those particular areas and other common areas, similar areas around the world, and to see this commonality begin to appear globally. And when you strip away the way that we perceive this phenomena, it was interesting to see that each one interacted with us pretty much the same way. And that then is how I began to track these things that were coming through the veil, not by their appearance, because their appearance can change. And in fact, they will change their appearance, sometimes twice or three times within a single generation. But the way they interacted with us remained the same. So that really was in the Mist of Gods, which again really forces its way into the deception of gods and men. And we touched on earlier, which was the Trinity. The trilogy,
right?
The Council of Three, the trilogy, and that really looked at, from an Irish standpoint, our folklore, and pulled in aspects from all the books that I was writing, and really formed this story, which begins here in the west of Ireland, in County Sligo, with the disappearance of a number of children on a mountainside, and an inquest that was happening in the Sligo courtroom. And that's where we're led into this supernatural trail of whodunit, which I have to say, leading on from the first part of the book, which is the Council of Three, leads us into the Malice of Darkness, which in itself is, the first pages of that is a real shocker. And a lot of people they really have been shocked by what is being written, and about how the fairy, how the fairy crosses over into the night attack phenomena, and how that can be so severe, and then leads us in an accelerated path right up into fracture, where we see the return of the old gods. So that really dealt with that, and now we're presently we're living in a society where, good God, it looks like we're getting ready to see the old gods return.
I
But
know.
who knows what's around the corner?
Exactly. Well, and it's interesting too. Some of the work I like to do, and I explore it a little differently, but I like to go to the ancient holy sites or
Mm-hmm.
sites of spiritual practice that have
Yes.
been in use in one form or another for several thousands of years. If I can get a
Mm-hmm.
place that goes back to the Mesolithic or Neolithic
Mm-hmm.
all the way through Christianity, that's
Mm-hmm.
ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been able to do some of this in the Middle East too. Well, Egypt and Turkey.
Mm-hmm.
Turkey, they want it's not the Middle East, Egypt, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I can find the feel of all those levels of spirituality or the type of the way it affects me, the place it takes me is the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a different name for the same place, the same path. And you can use a good ritual to get there, but you don't need to.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that was thinking was a good Latin or a good Catholic mass that you can really get into and it can take you someplace. All these
Mm-hmm.
other things can as well. And what I would see over and over again, the players would change, but the I don't have a good vocabulary to describe some of this, but
Mm-hmm.
this otherworldly place you go that's more divine and more whole and full of knowledge, I guess, is the
Mm-hmm.
same.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. I could see where you're coming from, because this aspect, from our ancestral perspective, where they accessed this other plane
mhm,
to gain knowledge,
mhm,
and that in itself has its foundations deeply, deeply set within spirit or serpent worship. So this was the very, very early style, which in itself took a lot of, it made a lot of demands,
mhm,
of the worshippers. But it's interesting that within the deception of gods and men, that I track some of these places and some of these beings that came through, and the
yeah,
serpentine connection is always there. And I'm speaking globally.
right.
This is not something that originated, in Iraq, and pretty much stayed around the Middle East. No, we find traces of serpentine worship globally. This was a global phenomena at one stage, um, and that in itself was a huge wake up call for me.
Mhm,
And looking at this, and then seeing how they were communicating, and how over the years harmonics really is an important factor there within that style of worship, and how then when we move into the modern age, we still see those old building styles from the Neolithic and things like that right into the modern era. Certainly, the medieval period was a vast, um, um, repository of this early style of worship, because the buildings themselves that they constructed, these huge cathedrals, there were huge resonance chambers.
yes.
And that is an important thing to understand, especially. And then, whenever you start pulling in sun worship, which was also a part of the Serpentine worship, you start seeing this crossover, and we start seeing similarities between the old ways and the new. And even today, where where the likes of the wonderful researcher David Paulides in the United States, he was the author of Missing 411, that examined the disappearances, the strange, bizarre, absolutely bizarre disappearances of people in the U.S. State parks, who disappeared under exceptionally bizarre circumstances. And he even admitted himself that the majority of these people disappeared in boulder fields, stone. Now, then, whenever we start crossing, again, we start crossing this connection with the stone, we start finding these common factors globally. And even from the Irish perspective, we have the banshee. The banshee, this woman, common translation is woman of the fairy, banshee. But she was not necessarily the fairy themselves. The she was the stone Neolithic structures. So she is woman of the mounds. She is from the people of the mounds. These doorways that opened up and they entered our reality.
Yes.
So again, we're seeing stone. We're seeing stone on doorways, even.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Keep going.
You're okay. Even when we look at mythology and folklore, for instance, within the UK, we will also find that this factor of stone when we consider the likes of Goblin, this little tiny ugly creature that was up to no all sorts of mischief. The Goblin originates from the Old French, which is Gobelin, which originates from the Germanic, which is Kub. Kub originates or translates into hole in stone. So again, you follow the line, you follow this movement back, this translation back, and we find stone again. And even today, when we consider the likes of when I was in Peru, I think it was 2010 possibly, where we were working with this huge monolithic structure that was underground, and it was called the Lanzone. Now, this was a replica of the original stone that was there, but it was in the same place. It was made of the same material, pink quartz.
Right.
And when you entered this passageway, this very dark passageway, you were greeted with this massive stone structure that had this huge carved face on it that was smiling at you, but it had massive teeth and everything else. It was actually quite overbearing, I gotta say, as you initially entered that particular chamber. Now, here's an interesting point. This chamber was designed in the same way, in the same pattern as the medieval cathedrals. Okay. Now, this structure, for all intents and purposes, was a huge, multi-tonned piece of rock. That was it. I got to check it over. I had hands on this rock. It was a piece of rock. That was it. But the moment that I criticized the priests for their acts of sacrifice was the moment that this rock came to life. And I got to say, I was completely puzzled because suddenly the top section of this huge monolith was producing a current that we were able to measure. And not only that, but I was using a specialized microphone that was pulling voices from the stone for an hour and a half. This stone was communicating, but it was triggered by us. So there's something coming through the stone. Now I was at a passage chamber, a Neolithic passage chamber here in Ireland, which predates the Great Pyramids of Giza.
Right.
And no one else was on the mountain. And the several days before, it was the summer solstice, and everybody who's anybody fights their way to the top of this mountain and tries to get inside the chamber.
Right.
And there's all sorts of fisticuffs happen at that particular point. But the summer solstice stretches over 7 days. So I don't get lost in the June the 21st date. I went back up several days later because I wanted to film the sun entering the chamber in through the light box and passing around the stones inside the chamber so that I could have it for my own records.
Right.
But as fate would have it, I also included the audio, a separate audio device. I don't know why, I just did. And off I went, allowing the camera to do what it did. And I went up to the top chamber on top of the hill. There was no one else on the mountain. It was just me.
Right.
So that was fine. And I spent several hours at the top chamber, just relaxing, and came back down again and grabbed the equipment and left. Now, as I was reviewing the audio and the video the next day on the computer, I was able to see the sun move around the chamber. I wanted to speed it up so that I could use that footage. That was fine. But I thought, well, while I'm doing this, I'll listen to the audio. During the audio, what I recorded was the sound of huge stone pillars turning. Now, the roof of this place is held up with huge stone pillars. Right. But I could see by the camera that the stone pillars were not moving. Yet I could hear them turn as if someone had got the hold of them and turning them. But nothing was moving. But what was more interesting was what come shortly afterwards. It was 2 short beats and 2 deep beats. Bum, 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 bum. This was coming from inside the chamber, not outside the chamber. That was coming from beyond.
Right.
That was not us.
No.
So that amazed me to no end. And I've been doing work since. And I spoke to you before, William, about a place which was connected deeply with Serpentine Worship here in Ireland. And we wrote about it. Cormac and I wrote about it in Legend Seekers.
Right.
And it was flippantly called the Island of the Dead. Little did we know that this place, 7 years later, we find out that this was part of a Nordic tradition, and this is pre-Viking traditions, pre-Christian traditions,
right?
That they brought the people to the island. This was an island of the dead. And the dead were left there. And what was believed to happen is that there was a transformation occurred. It's a process called metempsychosis, in which when the soul leaves, because by that stage the spirit is gone. At death, the spirit is gone, but the soul lingers on with the body for a period of time. When it finally breaks free at these locations, it would change into another animal. And that animal was a serpent before it entered the doorway to return back to where it came from. Now, when we've got these places of oracle where you would go back to, where the living would come to, where in particular kings and priests during the Serpentine worship era, they would come to these places where they would commune, and the oracle would then convey information that was held beyond. Some people will call it the Akashic records or the global consciousness, but these souls that had lived bring that information back across into the veil, into this vast well of knowledge. These serpents would come to the doorway and give over the information. Now, isn't it interesting that during the biblical period we've got the story of Eve being a female,
right?
Taking guidance from a serpent at the tree of knowledge. The serpent was the knowledge because they relayed the information. Now, here's the thing that I found out in Greece.
Okay.
That they have this particular place that the people went to. Now, there was 2 types of beings that were there. when this information was being given over. One looked like Pan,
Mhm.
what we conceive Pan to be, who was the god of the shepherds and everything else. He was also a guy that really was pissed off easily enough and could
Yeah.
wipe out the entire herd and shepherds and everything with it if he was annoyed. But setting Pan to one side, there was another group of beings that we really should be worried about, because these were the ones that came through the veil, and they were known as the Word. They were the ones who guided the priests and the kings to rule us.
And it's called the Word,
They were called
which
the Word.
in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Something. Yep.
There we go.
Yeah. I'm paraphrasing it
So
badly, but yeah.
yeah, that in itself,
On.
that in itself was a very very interesting point, because that then brought me onto this path of trekking those particular beings that were known as the Word. And that's what the deception of gods and men was about, and looking at where we tend to find them, how we find them, how our body needs to be attuned to also understand the deception that is utilized within these areas as well. And you know, the I was just speaking to a few folks there, and we were casually talking about going to locations, and you know, sometimes people will form circle, for instance, within a UFO field, or the UFO research field. They'll form a circle, very much like Stephen Greer's work, and group minds then will focus, and this will make this connection to whatever this is,
Uh-huh.
and it comes through, and usually it's balls of light that will appear and things like that. But that's okay when you've got a group of people who are not necessarily they have their own independent thoughts, their own wishes, and everything else. So you tend to get sporadic lights and things like that. But when you've got someone who is exceptionally focused and knows what they want and is very accurate about what they want, it's been said that they can materialize. These beings, whatever they are, will materialize and come through in a very solid form. Now the thing is, if we go back 10 years, we can read that in a book. It's called The Secret. So it's about putting your wishes out to the universe and being very focused about what you want. So that information was always there, but I think the problem being is that we lose this ancient knowledge because for some reason we have to call it something else. We have to give it a new name, and that in itself can be very very tricky. Now, when we find that this particular process is being camouflaged, that makes me wary. You know, I said to myself, well, why is this being hidden? Why, you know, this is nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we go back 2,000 years, we find that the Druids were using, the very same process known as Grinhult.
Okay.
So they were using the same process as what today we think is new, that these beings are wanting to reach us. This is not new, folks.
No.
And what I gotta say is that call it what you want. Call it whatever you want to call it. By any other name, it's conjuring. So we have to understand that there's an element of occult and esoteric practice when we're hunting the true phenomena. We have to recognize that for what it is. If we don't, we're going to fail.
Right. No, that makes sense. And so much of this works in a historic setting too. I mean, looking from archaeology, I don't call myself a historian. I have a bachelor's in history, but nothing focused enough. And it's my lifeblood, but it's,
Mhm.
I'm not qualified. But they're finding so many of those monuments, the burial chambers and all of this Neolithic,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
have those same frequency responses that you've talked about before in some of your programs I've been to, some of your books.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
110
110 hertz, and it is interesting, because a lot of that was theory. It was theory work. It was following the paper trail.
Right.
But for me, several years back, just before the lockdown, I was in Scotland, and I was visiting a Templar church.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as fate would have it, and it's I don't believe in coincidences. These things happen for a reason. We ended up at the church, which was closed, and it just so happened that the caretaker was sitting outside in his car, and he seen that we wanted to go to the church, and he got out of his car and said, "Would you like to see it?" And I said, "Yeah, I really would like to see it if you don't mind." And he says, "Yes, absolutely." And he brought us up to the church, opened the door, and he left. And he said, "When you're finished, I'll be in the office." And I said, "Look, would you mind if I played maybe some Gregorian chant in this? I've got a speaker system with me. I'd just love to hear and get the vibe of the place." And he says, "Work away, work away." What he didn't know is that I had a frequency hidden in the Gregorian chant.
110.
And it was 110. Now, I walked into this Templar church, and I knew the Templars had been working with this for quite some time. And the first arch, nothing. Second arch, nothing. The third arch, that's where we got the hit. And right above the altar,
Trinity.
where the altar would have been, the frequency bounced from the ceiling. But the way that it produced this sense, it felt like you were walking through a waterfall.
Right.
Though you were dry, but you walked through this, and this sense was completely different. It was like nothing I had ever experienced before. But yeah, they had been tuning that place, and 110 hertz is very poignant, especially from an Irish perspective as well, because I think Princeton University had arrived here, and they checked the majority of the passage chambers in Ireland, and they were tuned to 110 hertz.
Yeah, it makes so much sense too. I mean, some of what you read in history talks about how so much of this was used as a way to understand the world around you when you don't have science, and to have control over people. I mean, all kinds of things. But there's some very real metaphysical, whatever you want to call it, as part of that, for definitely. And these tombs, so often, I mean, they would use them as a power position. They wanted the voices to come out sometimes. They were using the ancestors as a way of connecting, from what we've been able to tell from a scientific or archaeological perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And all of it fits. I don't understand the serpent. I hate snakes. They scare me because 9,000 of them out there want to bite you and kill you with venom. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I've done some high stepping in Devon too, when I found out, that's a perfect place for an adder. It's like, yes. I admit it, I'm a coward about them, but they're still revered in areas, and even like in the Victorian age, a snake ring was seen as eternity. It would be part of a wedding ring or a love knot, because it was eternal devotion. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even after the snake had been vilified by the church,
Mm-hmm.
but it's part of the
You bring something up that it really did plague me for years as to what this meant, because when I was in Romania, we ended up at Panare, which was the seat of Vlad Tepes. The movies, of course, made him famous as Dracula.
Right.
And that particular place we were investigating, and we were looking for any trace of Vlad at the castle that's set away up on the high cliff. And I have to say, we got nothing. Not one thing did we get. However, the night before, I was plagued by this nightmare, this vision almost, of this woman who stood on the back of lions. And I thought, what on earth is this? And she was furious that I was at Dracula's Castle. And I thought, what, I woke up in a sweat and I thought, what on earth was that about? But that night that we were investigating Dracula's Castle, we got nothing from Vlad. But the moment that I switched and I addressed her, I said, "Are you here?" We got the reply in Class A response, "Leave now." That was it. That was the only response we got the entire time. Now, that would have made no sense in regards to an editor or a TV producer. Nothing at all. But it meant a lot to me. At that time, I didn't know what it meant. Now, years later, we find that, I was thinking about this whole thing. And as I was doing research for the next book, The Fruit of the Gods, I find images, carvings of this lady standing on the back of two lions. It was Astarte, the goddess of war for the Babylonians. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, what on earth is she doing at Dracula's Castle? How did that even happen? That doesn't make any sense until we understand that Vlad, his father, was connected with the Order of the Dragon. We were told it was to secure Christianity. The Order of the Dragon originates from serpent worship, the Babylonian serpent worship. Hence why the Babylonian goddess of war was at Dracula's Castle.
Plus, Vlad was in Turkey.
He was, yes.
And so, and all of those cultures move through Turkey at different times, different places.
That's right.
So there's several connections to it.
So I was very, very relieved that I was able to at least come to some sort of a conclusion with that, because it really did puzzle me for years as to what on earth did I just have.
Yeah. So I've been putting them up when they've come through. People have been commenting.
I see Glenn Woods there has just put up a comment about Amityville in Long Island. I don't even think Amityville House is called Amityville House anymore, and it's now been made into a private street, so you can't even just drive past the house. But funny enough, I was just speaking about Amityville today. That's an odd coincidence. Oh, yeah. But there you go. I believe I was just speaking to my wife about it, because she asked me, did I think that there was anything going on in Amityville? We hear all the stories that yeah or no. I actually do. I do think that there was something there, irrelevant of whatever it was, or whatever strength it was, or whatever was going on. Something wasn't quite right there. Now, I'm not saying it's there today. It's probably not. It's long gone. But it was interesting, because I remember coming across an affidavit. Now, I may have this back to front, but the affidavit said that it was from the priest that done the exorcism, or the blessing on the house, to say that no, there was nothing in 113 Ocean Avenue. He was right. He was absolutely right. There was nothing, because it was 112 Ocean Avenue. So there was that unusual irregularity. He wasn't telling lies, but he never exactly told the truth. So it does make you wonder.
Yes, it does. And there's obviously something out there. Look, I mean, you find this in all of your research. You've experienced firsthand some really fascinating encounters with the other.
Yes.
Terrifying,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
fascinating.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I've had my own experiences, very different way of doing it. I haven't gone delving into the depths of caves to fall to a watery death or things like that. Um, but and I haven't slept in holes in the island of the dead. That was another, yeah. Some of the stuff you've done is just really intriguing. Um, I'm surprised your wife lets you out of the house sometimes, but
So am I. So am I. I have to say, but there was one experience that we had. It was both Cormac and I were working on it, and it was initially it was just a hilltop site,
mm,
and the site itself, um, there were several houses, stone houses, cottages that were on it, but after the construction of the stone cottages, the people that lived in it weren't getting any rest. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that as they were sleeping, the blankets were being ripped off their beds and they were being ripped out of the beds in the middle of sleep. It eventually got to a stage where they abandoned the cottages,
mm,
and they left. Years later, they opened the place as a quarry, and all hell broke loose. And I can remember interviewing the guy that owned the quarry, and he said that initially they had a tool shed at the other side of the yard, and then offices opposite. And whatever this thing was would walk from the tool shed straight along the path and into the offices. No one ever seen his face,
right,
always his back. But one of the guys that was in the tool shed was cutting timber, and he was clubbed on the back of the head. This thing was vicious. It clubbed him in the back of the head, and he fell forward, sawing off his fingers. Now, they went after him, and he went into this tool shed, and no one ever found him. And things got worse and worse and worse. The more they pushed into the mountain, the more they broke ground, the worse this became. And it got to a stage where the church were being called in regularly to do exorcisms. And it got to a point where the church even said, guys, we can't do anything more with this. We came across something like this in Africa. We can't do anything with it. And so there was a guy that stayed on the upper floors of the offices in the yard. There was a guy stayed there from Italy, and he was one of the drivers for the yard. And he had the place filled with Christian iconography, Madonna and everything else, and the cross and all that stuff. And he would have left and went to town and came back. Now the place was locked up, very well locked up. And he came back, and the statues were smashed to powder. But yet there was no sign of anyone being in the place.
right,
And this continued and continued and continued. It got to a stage where he then started bringing large guard dogs to the place. 4, in fact. 4 large German shepherds. All 4 were murdered on sight by this thing. It was hideous. And it got to a stage where they couldn't do anything more. They shut the place down. And that was the end of it. Now, Cormac and I arrived on site. We spoke about this, and we had our own encounter with it. And it was one of those stories that beforehand we were keen on sharing everything, because we wanted to get people out of their houses and back into the countryside and experience the legends and mythology and folklore of the land.
right.
Not this place. Both Cormac and I agreed this is not. We'll tell the story, but this is not for the general public. They should not be here.
Right.
And I arrived up in the car, and I parked across the path where this thing would walk. It was my way of saying, I'm here now. And we went and explored the site and came back, and all the electric windows were down in the car. And I knew there was no way that I did that. And we knew that trucks and machinery were all malfunctioning on site.
Mm-hmm.
And Cormac then had to go down to get a jacket because it was very, very cold up there, and there was a frost starting to settle. And I had a fire lit in the middle of the huge area, the open area. But Max was with me, my four-legged companion,
Yes.
and he started growling at the thing at the corner of the sheds. I couldn't see it, but this was the first time that he became fixated with the corner of the shed. He just continually stared and just low growls at this area of the place.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a confrontation, and it felt like it sounded, sorry, rather than felt, it sounded like someone with large nails, a typical horror movie, the large nails on the blackboard, scraping down the blackboard. Well, this went down the side of the corrugated iron of the old workshop, and that was its way of saying, "Who the hell are you? Why are you here?"
Yeah.
And at which stage Cormac then came back, and the lights of the van swayed around the workshop, and everything stopped. So we never got to the end of it, and probably thankfully not, because I suspect that Max might not have made it out that particular night. And it's strange that we also see that particular type of phenomena also crosses over into what you see there in the United States at the likes of the Uinta Basin in Skinwalker Ranch. They hate this phenomena, hates dogs.
Right.
Dogs in particular, because they can pick them up much quicker than we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's interesting you mentioned the Skinwalker Ranch too, because I'm one of these people, if it's on television, it's there to make money. Truth is secondary. It doesn't matter how good the actors and stuff are portraying, or whatever the intent of the people are. I know that I need validation that's independent to say, yes, this is true. And I've watched the program and it's interesting, but I need somebody else to tell me, what is or isn't accurate and the conclusions that are jumped to and stuff like that. But it's interesting to know they're looking at the UFO part of it. And I mean, okay, I'm trying to put my thought together, which isn't always easy for me. But you have the metal or whatever it is people are mining. You have the electromagnetic fields. You have our own brains and what we can create. I mean, there are experiments that people have gotten together and created entities, not solid ones, but they've created them. And we have natural gases like radon and such that can create hallucinations and different things. How much do you think of any of this can combine together and create some of this? Or how much is real? I know there's so much out there that are real. I've seen elemental type beings with my own two eyes in the middle of the day. I mean, I know I've seen a Bigfoot, I think. And I know there's stuff there. So I'm not criticizing or being skeptical, but you probably know more about this than anybody else I know about how much can be wet.
I think from that particular show, I think they do a marvelous show. It's very entertaining. I haven't watched them all. I have watched one or two of them, but it is interesting, and having been in that location in October 2019, I was very intrigued. And started to follow my own little bit of research, and back in the day when the Celts came to this land, they would never have identified with the medieval version of a dragon that we see today, and to them it was a giant serpent, was their form of a dragon. A pesht, it was called. And it obviously over the course of time it morphed into what we know. But they were always the keepers of, certainly, you tended to find them around a lot of natural treasures and things like that, natural wealth. And of course with the likes of I can't remember the name of the author now, but he'd done that trilogy of movies about the middle world.
Oh, Tolkien.
Tolkien, yes, Tolkien.
Yeah,
He had Smog, the large dragon that sat on the treasure.
right.
My own research would suggest to me, and it could be right, could be wrong. I usually just whatever and move along.
Right.
But my research would suggest to me, lads, leave the gold alone. And I'm speaking directly to the people that own the ranch. Leave the gold alone. And isn't it strange that the person that they have guarding the ranch with the gun
is dragon.
Is the dragon.
That's right. And I didn't know it was gold that they were looking or thought was there.
No, well, it's never been said. But looking at it from my perspective, and looking at some of the history of some of the lads that appear in the show, there's certainly technology there that was utilized to expose gold veins and things like that. So, and there, that particular area is known for its natural wealth. So I would definitely advise leave the gold alone, lads, because that type of wealth comes with its own trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's interesting. I hadn't done any of the research on the location like that, and so I wasn't sure. But okay, yeah, that's fascinating. How do you think? This is just going back to the rest of it. I'm trying to understand more of why it's always a serpent. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, but
why is it always a serpent? The serpent in itself, you see, was the the origins of the serpent was us. It originated with us. It was part of us.
Okay.
So when we start looking at that, we have to step outside and look at what we're actually communicating with. If there is part of us that leaves after death, which is called the soul or the shadow, according to the old traditions to the north. And these traditions, I have to say, came through Ireland first, went up to the north, and then back down through. They originated in Babylon.
Right. That makes sense.
These traditions said that the soul changed into a serpent before it moved back into the other plane. Yeah. So when it comes back, we're communicating with us.
Us. As a serpent.
So everything is us, and not every. You have to understand as well, the soul itself, the way it's designed, is designed to keep this husk safe for as long as possible, so that the spirit can exist and experience and do what it needs to do. Mm-hmm. So when, for instance, we end up in a situation where someone, for instance, has a very, very tough encounter with something from beyond, like an abduction case. Mm-hmm. When it's all over the course of days, weeks, months following that, they start developing these extra psychic abilities, prophetic knowledge almost, and they would possibly suggest that, well, this was a gift from them. I counter argue that within the book, and I challenge it, and I say, not necessarily. You see, what may be happening here is that all of the psychic abilities, which is a trait of the shadow of the soul, is now stepping forward to take control, to make sure that you do not end up in that situation again. It's a protective mechanism.
Okay.
Now, it's not always going to work, but when we walk into a haunted property, for instance, um, um, most real estate agents are aware that about 75% of homes are sold on feeling. You walk into a building with 4 white walls and you go, oh, this is lovely. I love this. This is a nice feeling. What is that? What is that feeling that we're pulling on? How is our body processing that? Or we could easily walk into the building and go, oh no, I don't like this. There's something not right here, and I'm leaving. And you leave without putting a bid on. Mm-hmm. What is that? What I suggest is that is your shadow telling you, beware, there's another shadow here.
Right.
And those shadows from the research that I was doing, can exist for a period outside without having to return. If there is someone living in the building, they can leech off that person. Right. They don't necessarily have to connect with that person, or they can connect, and that becomes a problem. Because that attachment, and that's exactly what it becomes, is an attachment. And that can then lead, if time progresses, to a symbiotic relationship. And if, for instance, we end up in a situation where multiple shadows attack one body, that creates an instability within the body. Mm-hmm. There's an imbalance occurs there as each shadow tries to imbue its wishes and wants and needs, because the soul, the shadow, is there for our basic needs, our wants, our needs, our lusts, and everything else is there through that. Now, there are, of course, shadows that have the ability to grow and develop, and they're not all bad, by no means.
No.
But the base of the shadows, there is nothing darker than a human soul. We have to be aware of that each time that we use a Ouija board, each time that we use whatever device we're using to try and reach something from the other side. All of those times, the research suggests we are not dealing with spirit. The spirit is gone. Each time we are communicating with shadow.
That makes a lot of sense. And I haven't thought about it that way before.
And each shadow has access to that record, that Akashic record, that global consciousness. That information can be used. But the moment that you become suspicious and you start questioning that shadow, poof, 9 times out of 10, they're gone. They will not want to deal.
Right. Fascinating. Let's see, Glenn has a question up here for you. Let me put it up.
Tarot, I would see, is a type of you're trying to gain information from the area through the card. The card itself is not necessarily pulling information from the entities on the other side. So for using a tarot card, I don't have an issue with. What I would have an issue with, and it's a small issue, in that whether we use whatever type of device to try and open communication with beings on the other side, whether it be a simple thing as a voice recorder, for each time that we say, is there anyone there? That intent is there. We have opened that door. Now, that door may not result in anything that particular night, but 2 weeks later, or 6 months later, or 6 years later, suddenly we wonder why a place becomes haunted. Because we never bloody well closed the door. Now the problem again is with the Ouija board, you're now moving from one intent to four intents,
Right.
and that creates a bigger problem. And again, we have to be exceptionally careful about what we're opening the door to, and also remember to close that door.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And then for psychics or mediums doing their work, there needs to always be an intent to end it, to
Oh, of course.
close the door the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Politely. Thank you. It's like,
Yes.
okay, now we're done. And
Absolutely. There was a wonderful series of experiments that were conducted in school in England in 1985, and they ran for around 5 years. But during that particular process, they had encounters with these things that physically manifested in the darkness. They were told they couldn't work with the lights and things like that. They had to work in the darkness. And these lights were appearing, and there was small UFOs that were appearing as well in the seance area. They were able to record many, many different pieces of phenomena. One in particular really interested me because it appeared as a grey. A grey appeared in a seance room. And I thought, that's odd. He's not coming from Mars or from somewhere Alpha Centauri. He's stepped through a doorway. Why has a grey ended up here? And there was another time when I got to hear that during another séance that the process was shut down because there were others greys that were many greys who were wanting to come through to here, and it wasn't good.
Okay. So
we have to be careful about opening those doors to whatever's coming through. We have been opening the doors for many, many years. We have been doing that, and that has been causing leaks to get in, and that in itself has been causing problems. And these people that went to these areas, which is described in the book of The Deception of Gods and Men, these people fell victim to our Achilles heel, the promise of greed, wealth, and ego. And there was always a price to pay for that, and we see that no more so than today. We see that particular influence is taking hold. Now, I was often told that these stories about the good old Nazis and who were communicating with these beings from somewhere else, especially the SS. Of course, there was talk of them, but there was never really hard proof for that. There was always hearsay and suggestion and things like that. And it was only recently that I came across a document from the 1960s of the Douglas Aeronautical Company, who were using Ouija boards. There was documentation, and they were funded for this, to use Ouija boards to communicate with aliens, to get advanced engine systems. Didn't happen, but they were trying it. It was a paper trail to say organizations are using this technique to try and get ahead.
Okay, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea. I know that we've tried to reverse engineer some of the things we captured from the Nazis, use their documentation of different things,
Yeah,
including for zero gravity type trends, travel kind of things, with limited success, it seems.
Yeah.
What do you think the Greys are exactly?
Us. In a nutshell, us. Everything that comes through that doorway, I suspect, is us of some version.
Okay.
And the problem is that it has an image to cover its tracks. If we strip away the mask, we find at its core is that spark of us.
Okay.
The mask, the image of the grey, is the deception. The image of the reptoid is the deception. The image of the fairy is the deception. The image of the jinn is the deception. At every spark, it's us.
Wow.
They do not want to go back, because looking at the information that was released during the old school experiment, and other ancient manuscripts, they describe the place where the soul returns. It is a place of nothing, absolutely nothing. So you can understand why at any point they get a chance to come through, they want to come through, and that's why they create an attachment, because they want to stay here as long as possible.
Right. It all makes perfect sense. It really does.
So wouldn't it be useful during a séance to say that you were great Auntie Barbara, to whoever wanted to hear from great Auntie Barbara, and give them a line just enough for them to reduce their defenses, just enough that they can latch on. That's why it's exceptionally important. Question everything.
Right. Right. With the work I do, and working with those that have crossed, gone wherever, they tell me what it is. Now, I'm not sure if it's spirit or soul I'm talking to. And you've pointed out the differences. And if it's spirit, then that reality could be very different than what the soul's going through in nothingness. And I'm thinking it's probably spirit. But you're right. We've never, in this day and age, most people think of it as the same thing. And it's not.
In the old Nordic traditions, they have a belief system that the spirit, at point of death, boom, it goes.
Right.
It's gone, and it ends up in this beautiful place of green grass and meadows and flowers, and you go through this gate. They also mention in these old manuscripts, you go through this gate and across a bridge, and into this beautiful land. And that in itself, that beautiful land is like a staging post. It's like a bus station.
Okay.
Where then your spirit then is detached to where it needs to go to. Now here's the kick in the teeth. Do you know what they call that place?
No.
Hell.
Oh.
Hell was not the Greek version of hell, fire, brimstone, and fury. No, in the traditional format, hell was the beautiful place of the green grass.
Well, and hell, from a Judeo-Christian perspective, is actually a very new invention. And theologians often think that it's describing Gethsemane. Actually, I think it's called Gethsemane. Excuse the tripping over my tongue. But it was an area where the garbage dumps were.
That's right.
And it was always burning. There was always smoke and fire, and that's kind of where the model came from. And
absolutely.
It was more of a control mechanism to keep people in line.
Yeah.
You don't want to spend eternity there.
And mix up the Greek version of Hades, and whoa, off you go. You've got the worst place that you ever want to go to.
Yeah. Yeah. There's very little in the Bible that is original. It's mostly copied from millennia of earlier ideas and thoughts.
Yeah. It's there was a story of this a young girl. There's two of them. They were Australian girls, I believe, and they were heading down the road. They had to take this cat to the vet, and I don't know what they called the cat, Satan or something like that. It must have been, because as they were driving along the road, the cat broke free from whoever was holding it, and went absolutely ape inside the car. The two girls were confused and were trying to control the cat, and they didn't see the bus in front of them slam on the brakes, and they were coming at full speed, bang, into the back of the bus. Now, both of them came around, and they were walking on this path in this green field. And they're going, no, they didn't speak to each other. They just knew, instinctively, they knew what they were thinking and everything else. And, they were puzzled. Where are we? Where are we going? And they got to this fork in the road. Instinctively, the driver knew she had to go right, where instinctively the passenger knew she had to go left. The one that went left came back and entered her body. She survived the crash. The driver did not. It fitted in perfectly to the Nordic version of hell, the transiting station.
Yep. And it also fits with what people talk about as far as a near death or dying and coming back into your body.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm.
See, Glenn's got another question here.
In regards to the Spiritualist Church, I was kicked out of the Spiritualist Church because initially, whenever I started out on my own personal path, I needed to try and understand where the fine line was between imagination and these other abilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up going to the church and said, look, I would really like to explore this. Is there any chance that you could possibly help me? And they did. They took me in, mm-hmm. and they said, okay, we'll see what you can do. And my friend, he sat outside the circle, and everyone else, there must have been maybe 25 people there, and we went through this meditative state and everything else. And during that particular process, the lady for the church was guiding us through this meditation, and she walked over to me, and the way that someone puts their hands over your ears but doesn't touch your ears, you can hear the change in pitch, and I was trying not to smile, wondering what on earth is this crazy lady doing. And when it was all over, she went round everyone and said, oh, what did you experience, what did you see, and everything else, and everybody was telling them, and I said, well, when it came to me, I said, well, I to be honest, I didn't see anything, but I just wondered to myself, why did you come across and put your hands over my ears? And she said, I didn't. And I said, no, you actually did, because I actually heard you coming across. And the people on each side of me said, yeah, we heard you coming across the floor. She started to get worried at that point. I said, I didn't come anywhere near you. Now, I turned to my friend who was sitting outside the circle, and I said, Michael, who came over here? He says, Barry, no one was near you. So that was my introduction. Uh-huh. Now you see that there is a fine line, and I stepped across that line.
Right.
So initially, I said, okay, can I continue this? And we did. But there was one particular person there who, I don't know why, he was having a great problem with me being there, and trying to understand what I was trying to accomplish. And he tried his damnedest to spiritually shut me down. I suppose you would call it a psychic attack.
Yeah.
But whoever was there with me shut him down instead. And he was furious beyond furious. And I was asked to leave. I said, sorry, Barry, we can't have you here. And I thought, well, I didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
But look at that was that. And I have to be very, very cautious, and say to folks, be aware of cold reading and things like that. And Yeah, when you tend to find religion, you tend to find corruption.
Yes.
So I would err caution with any of them.
I've heard from most people I've known that have been involved in the different ones, at the very least, there's political animosity going
Mm.
on, out control and power and things splitting up and are
And
yeah,
that in itself, William, is the trait of the shadow. It is the trait of these things coming through.
right.
When you have that attachment, that corruption and darkness will start to filter. And we see it time and time again within the paranormal research teams. They
Yes.
have good teams, and then suddenly, from the inside out, they suddenly explode.
Yeah.
But
And a lot of times, and I hadn't thought about it this way before, because a lot of times the ones that create so much of the drama and the explosion, you can see that this is part of who they are
mhm,
when they come in. They're
mhm,
the attention seeker, the needer to be the star, the
mhm,
boss. I mean,
mhm,
it goes
mhm,
back to ego, self-worth issues, and you could probably
mhm.
get a psychiatrist to analyze them down to
Yeah, yeah,
what day
yeah.
in childhood they had this trauma. But I hadn't quite thought about it in the same way, and yeah, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense.
There are ways we can defend ourselves against it. You know, that there are ways that we can spot it, and that's something I speak about in the influence.
Mm.
About what we should be watching out for, and what foods can have an effect on us. You know, this aspect of going into a haunted property, and we're trying to investigate, and suddenly, before we know it, um, we're having issues. The the body's ability to translate what our soul is telling us is fantastic, but that can be shut down. That process can be shut down by consuming refined sugar.
Right.
So what we eat before an investigation can blind us. And isn't it? I find it remarkable that just the other day. I say the other day. It was actually last year. It was Halloween. I was standing in the queue at the shop, and I was just looking at the shelves, and I was thinking about kids, about how they have that natural ability to see things, to communicate, and have imaginary friends and everything else, and do all they're doing, and then over the course of time it narrows, and we lose contact with that and everything else. But the children in themselves, they are the brightest lights. They're the ones that possess us in the rawest form without having the taint of the older years being applied. And isn't it strange that come times when the veils between our world and theirs is at its thinnest, we feed our children full of candy.
That's interesting.
We
Yes.
we blind our children.
But that's also a new phenomena because the they used to have treats and different things, but
Yeah,
they weren't all the sugar in the old days.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we're
yeah,
talking 150 years old days. I mean,
yeah.
so
Hmm.
what have we subconsciously learned as a culture that that's what we're doing now?
Well, that in itself, you got to follow the money trail.
Yep.
And when you start following the money trail, you start finding the ego, the power, the promise, and everything else. When you start blinding the populace, that's when you should be really worrying at that particular point.
Yeah. And that happens in so many ways. Um,
This was something else, and I don't, I try not to give too much credence to this. It was just something that I was mulling over, um, because we can see that there are certain elements of the shadow that can influence and utilize our technology,
right.
um, and that in itself can cause great issue. But when you consider that when these things are coming back, um, through the veil to attach to us, and sometimes there are offerings made in which one shadow, our shadow, is kicked out as this other one's brought in, which changes the character of the person completely.
Right.
But this husk will eventually come to an end. There is going to come to a point where either they shift to another one, or they're going to go back. And the plan is not to go back. But if we look at the development of technology, especially AI, we can see that there's a possibility here that this aspect of AI would allow a shadow to remain indefinitely.
That's frightening.
Because then we are no longer needed.
Right. Except by the spirit. I mean, the spirit piece.
The spirit is no longer required.
Right. Now, when I do believe and have worked with reincarnation, it makes sense. It's what I've seen. And if the spirit has chosen to be reincarnated, would that shadow, the soul, the same one, come back with it? Could that be a way that it would reprocess, or would it be a different soul?
It would be. I would imagine it would be a different one. I went through that process as well, of exploring reincarnation, and in fact, I had read many accounts, but it's okay reading an account of someone having a reincarnation or tales of a reincarnation, but there's nothing beats actually getting yourself into the field and experiencing that yourself. So I did. I put my own neck in the line, and I ended up going back twice. And my intention was not to go back to revealing that I was Queen of Sheba or something like that. Something that we tend to hear all the time, Queen Elizabeth or King Charles or whatever the case may be. I wanted to see if I could find a life that I lived, and there was a paper trail. And I did. And I ended up traveling to that location that I had never been to before to find out the guy died in the way that I had seen. He lived in the house that I had described. He crossed the bridge that is still there. I lived that now. I went back to find that. Now, there was also other things that happened at that particular time, which was phenomenal. The experiences that I had there were phenomenal, but to be able to go back and find a paper trail to see that this person did exist, and in fact gain more knowledge through that experience that explained why he died the way he died. Because I was reading newspaper accounts that said that he was washed off the bridge by a freak wave. Not what I felt. He jumped off the bridge. He committed suicide.
Right.
So I was able to fill in the gaps of that. And it was such a harrowing story. But on the way down to that particular property, I stopped off beside the graveyard, and there was an old cottage, ruins of a cottage. It really drew my attention. I thought to myself, what on earth? It's just a pile of stone, no bigger than my shin that was left. And it was just those stone walls. And I thought, I haven't got the time for that. And I headed on down to this property that I had seen, this long lighthouse property. And when I got to the door, and the lady who runs this place as a guest B&B invited me in, I was expecting all visions of things that I just didn't know what was going to happen. And I walked in and there was nothing. And I thought, this is not what I thought was going to happen. And she said, well, why are you here? And I told her the story, and she said, well, you're telling me the life story of Daniel White. That's how I got his name and everything else, and that's how everything unfolded. And I said, but I was expecting visions and everything else about, well, this is where he lived. This is where he left from. And she said, not quite. He didn't live here. And I said, what do you mean? They worked from here. And I said, well, where did they live? The old cottage up by the graveyard, the one that was pulling me toward it. So I said, okay, would you mind if I went back and just saw what's going on? She says, yes, go ahead, go ahead. And I went back. Um, Now, I should point out that Daniel's father saw him in the water during the storm, and he jumped in after him to save him. Both were washed out to sea. They were never found. They never
Mm.
recovered. Daniel's two brothers were killed in the Great War. There was no one else to take the responsibility of the lighthouse keeper. The mother was left penniless and destitute and lived out the rest of her days in a cave behind the cottage
Oh no.
where she died. Now, I ended up, I went up on the bicycle and dropped the bike and stood for ages at the edge of this cottage and just waited. And there was nothing there. And I suddenly, I stepped across that threshold into this house and then into the kitchen. And that is where I had this experience, because up until that particular point, being a young man, I had taken the love a mother has for her son, for her child, for granted.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, I was greeted by that overwhelming love that a mother has by his mother. And I say his mother from that lifetime.
Right.
She waited. She was still there waiting for the return. And she was released from that particular place. I went through that process and released her from that. But such an overwhelming experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, the pain that followed that in the stomach area was phenomenal. Oh my God, the cramps for days. But it was the end. It was the end of that. It was the end of the process.
Right.
And I remember whenever I came home, and my own mother of this lifetime said to me, "Can I have my son back?" And I said, "I'm back." So that was it. That was it. So that was my experience of reincarnation. But the thing is about reincarnation, I wondered to myself, is it possible that I maybe intercepted or was intercepted by a shadow and given its life during that process of hypnosis? Is it possible that was imbued onto me? I don't know. I can't answer that, because there was one time that I went to a hypnotherapist in Northern Ireland, and he brought me into his study, and I was just about to cross over when suddenly I was aware that I heard footsteps in the room that weren't his. And suddenly my own instinct, my own shadow activated, and boom, everything was pulled in.
Right.
And there was no way I was going back under. That was it. My defenses were up. The gates were closed because there was something else there. And I said, no, that's it. We're done.
That's fantastic. I'm not sure that's the right word. Fascinating. I haven't ever had an experience anywhere near like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I give past life readings, it's a reading, but
Mm-hmm.
it's shown to me. It's not, and it's more to do with, it helps explain some of the things that people are going through now.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
just
yeah.
like things like that. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
very different
Mm-hmm.
thing. And I think the hypnosis I've supposedly been under for readings has, I think I've been too
Mm-hmm.
awake and aware to, because my own experience with my own past lives happens more when I stumble into one,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
almost literally. It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
oh,
yeah.
that's my back, or I was buried there. That's mine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But this is really intriguing, and it makes me look at all. it makes me ask more questions. I need to do more in-depth work with looking at the two pieces, the shadow
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Hmm.
the soul or the spirit. And it, yeah, you're making my brain work, which is a good thing. Um,
Well, I have to say, and I should say this because I was my wife commanded me to remind you that when you decide to travel back across this side of the Atlantic, that when you come to Ireland, you're staying with us. Okay.
Thank you. And when you're coming here, my guest room is yours.
Thank you very
And
much.
it even has the occasional ghost. But it behaves, they behave themselves. And it's
Grand.
not an old house. My parents had it
Hmm.
built. Nobody's died here.
Hmm.
But anyway, those are whole other conversations. Uh, I know it's getting late, your time.
It is
I,
20 to midnight.
yeah, I should probably let you go, though I could talk for forever. Um, Barry, thank you.
Thank you,
It's
William,
been
for
a real
having me.
pleasure. And
Thank you for having me. And if folks are after the books, they can pop across to Amazon for the latest one, or they can pop across to my website at charmstealer.com.
okay, let me
And
write this in the thing.
yeah,
CHRMSTEALER.
mm-hmm,
Um, good,
charmstealer.com.
good. I highly recommend everything he's done. Um, and I don't do that for many people, but um, yeah, for all of those of you out there, I mean, can find the videos, look at the old Ghost Hunters International shows because those I really like those. Part because you didn't always find things,
No.
um, which gave a lot of credibility to it. Um, but the videos on the three-fingered mummies, the South Pole UFO program,
Hmm.
I mean, all of the and I know there are more of them out there and other shows I'm not aware of, but um, check them out, people. You you won't be disappointed. You may be surprised. You won't be disappointed. And people have been caught, writing in a bit about how much they've enjoyed it and all kinds of nice, wonderful things that
I hear.
I think you can see. This will be on Simply Spooky, and
Great.
it'll also be on my YouTube eventually
Lovely
later
stuff.
today, and
Lovely.
I'll send you the links. So
Lovely. All right,
okay,
William.
okay, take care.
You have a
Thank
great
you.
night. Okay.
I will.
Thank you. Take
Bye
care.
bye, everybody.